Hi, I'm Patricia Patton, and this is my project for Geography 101 about the enduring effects of pre-Hispanic culture on modern Mexican cities. So I've always really admired the way modern Mexican culture, dance, food, music has such close roots to their indigenous past. I myself like Swedish, Irish, Danish, but my family has no ties to that background, and so I've always thought that that was really interesting about Mexico. And so for geography class, I want to look at the physical effects of that past on the present. So we're going to start in the Yucatan Peninsula. The Yucatan was and is the home to the Maya people. So during the classical Mayan period, about maybe 12 to 1500 years ago, they really ruled over the peninsula and they connected all of their town centers with these sacbe or sacbeob, these white roads. So this is an excavated example of a small one, but some of these could be elevated from the surrounding landscape by like 20 feet. So if you think about like an elevated highway today, and they could be 60 or 100 feet wide, room for lots of traffic and commerce in both directions. They were constructed of many layers of rock, so they're very sturdy and lasted. And the top layer was often white because that would reflect the moonlight and the starlight, and they could travel 24 hours a day. So they were so durable that a lot of roads and highways in the modern day were constructed on top of them because they made such a good foundation. And then moving into the very present right now, just this year, this Train Maya opened up in the Yucatan Peninsula. And you can see this will be the eventual route that circles the peninsula. These train stops are mostly built around archaeological sites that date back to the classical Mayan period, or modern day towns that are in fact towns that have been there since the classical Mayan period. So you really see the history there in the transportation structure. Now we're going to move up to the central Mexican Valley. First, we're going to look at Cholula. So Cholula was a pre-Hispanic city. It's actually the oldest continuously inhabited city in the Americas. So the inhabitants date back to well before the time of the conquest in the early 1500s. That people had already been there for thousands of years. But it was an interesting area because there were, after a series of conquests, there were about 6 different ethnic groups living in that area pretty harmoniously, pretty independent from each other, but like in overlapping territory in the Cholula area. And so then when Moctezuma came in, Moctezuma was the ruler there when Cortez and the Spaniards came over. About half of those ethnic groups supported him and half did not. And that actually enabled the conquest in some ways, the Spanish conquest, because the ones that didn't support Moctezuma joined on with the Spaniards to fight against him. And so the Cortez and his people had a little bit of an inside track there. So after the conquest, we see this map. It was made very soon after. And you can see the different neighborhoods on here. Each neighborhood has its own church that the Spanish came in and put up. But you have these different neighborhoods, that essentially spring out from those different ethnic groups, with each group in a different neighborhood at the time. And I want to point out that in the back of each of these pictures of the different churches, you see this hill. So we're gonna see that again here. All right, so Cholula, this is a picture in modern day Cholula. This is that hill that we saw in the back. And of course, as the Spanish do, they built a church on top of it. So you see that there today. So Cholula, both in the past and the present, is known for being a city, a really religious city. So Cortez said that when he stood on top of this hill, he could see 430, he called them mosques, but basically he meant temples, like worship centers, just in the surrounding area. And today people say that there are at least 365 churches in Cholula, one for each day of the year. So it's sort of carried on that tradition. So talking about this hill that's back here, the Spanish came in, they saw this hill, they said, let's throw our big church on top of it, everyone will be able to see it. But interestingly, you can see it a lot better in this picture. That hill is not a hill. That hill is in fact a pyramid that the Spaniards did not recognize as being a pyramid because it was so old that dirt had covered it, and vegetation had grown up, trees. And so they did not see, what's a little easier to see here in this picture, that it was in fact, a pyramid, an ancient worship center. So that, the Spanish church post-conquest is sitting on top of this temple. And you can go and see both of them today. So let's talk about Mexico City. This is the Mexican flag, and we have on the Mexican flag the picture of an eagle eating a snake sitting on a cactus. And the reason that that symbol is on their flag is because the story is that the people who settled Mexico City, or Tenochtitlan, that they were supposed to travel in the desert until they saw an eagle eating a snake on a cactus. And that was where they were to build their city. And so as they came along, they saw this, but they saw it in a lake on top of a mountain. And that lake is where Mexico City is today. So how do you build a city on a lake? Well, you make these structures called chinampas. So they would build like a fence in the lake and then fill it with dirt. And then they had a surface to farm and then also to put their houses on. So you have an idea here from this picture. They used the water in between these chinampas as canals and roads to make for easy travel. And the city just grew that way as people built more and more of these over time. So what happened then, here's a picture from soon after the conquest. So you can see here, we have the temple in the middle of the city, surrounded by these little tiny islands, these chinampas with farms and houses on it. We have pathways that have been built to the mainland to connect them to other things. And so when Cortez and the conquistadores came in and took over, this is what they were taking over. Now, maintaining this actually involved a pretty complicated system of aqueducts and dams and viaducts and drainage systems so that when it rained, the water didn't flood everything. But the Spanish came in, enslaved most of the indigenous people, who then were no longer able to keep up all of that infrastructure. And so as the infrastructure disintegrated, the city would flood when it rained. And the Spaniards didn't like that, but instead of going back and fixing the infrastructure, they just said, well, let's drain this lake. And so they had a couple big projects to drain the lake, and then they were able to build on that dry lake bed that was left behind. This is a picture of some of the ancient aqueducts and the viaducts that were there in Mexico City during the time of the conquest. All right, so in modern day Mexico City, there is a part that is called Xochimilco, and now the city has grown to encompass it. At the time, pre-Hispanic conquest, it was its own city, but now, they've merged. But Xochimilco is actually a place where we can still get a good idea of what this system looked like, because they've preserved the waterways there. So here is the map of the city of Mexico. We're just on Google Maps. We are going to, whoops, zoom in. So the main Tenochtitlan, that would have been in this area. And this would have been lake, but as we go down here to the south, we can find the town of Xochimilco, which is now in Mexico City, but at the time wasn't. And when you look, just like you can see on Google Maps, you see these lines, the little roads, but when we get down to Xochimilco, those lines are not roads, they are in fact canals. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. So up here you have the chinampas that are still being farmed. That's why they mostly look green. All of these dark lines are the canals and that serve as roads and that separate the plots. And then as you move down to the south, you are moving down to where people live, but you can see there are still canals that connect that area. These housing developments are still on Chinampas, and people use the canals as roadways. If we come up here, whoops, onto here, we can see one of the biggest canals on Street View. And so we can travel along here and see, the houses that are built alongside it on these chinampas. These are the same trees that were the type of trees that they used, 1,000 years ago to build the city of Tenochtitlan. All right, so in the center of Tenochtitlan, they had a big plaza. And this is a picture of what that would have looked like based on archaeological evidence and stories from the time. So there's a big temple here it's to a couple of the gods. We had government buildings. We had open spaces for public gatherings, for marketplaces. There were stores here. All of this here in the plaza. And here is a picture of it as Cortez's men drew the map when they came in. So we see the temple, we see the government buildings, we see, the surrounding bits. And this is modern day Mexico City in the exact same area. So they came in, and right there where the temple had been, they tore down all the buildings and they used the rocks to build a new city in its place. So we have a cathedral in almost the same place where the temple was. We have government buildings where the government buildings were, and we have this giant open space, the Zocalo, where they have giant gatherings and exhibitions and things today. There's also shops that surround it, and you'll actually see something like this in most Mexican towns, a plaza with a church, a government building, and shops. And that dates back to those pre-Hispanic plazas. Often in those plazas, they'll have a market or a tianguis, and that continues to the day. Even the word tianguis dates back to pre-Hispanic times. It just means market. This is a picture from pre-Hispanic times of a tianguis. You can see that, this is an area with a few feather sellers. And down here we have some people who made textiles grouped together by what they're selling. Here's like a modern day artist's rendition of what it might have looked like. And I want to point out, so we have the temple in the background, and then all along here, these would have been shops that were open daily. The market happened once every 5 days, about once a week. But then the shopkeepers would come out to these doorways, these portales, and set up their goods outside of the store so that the market goers could see them. And we have the same thing today. And in a lot of Mexican towns, you have those arched buildings along the plaza, with stores and restaurants. This gives you a little bit of an idea here of what you might see. So the last thing that I want to show is what really inspired me to choose this topic. So Thomas Cole, who's an artist, has made these incredible paintings that essentially look like drone images, but of Tenochtitlan in the pre-Hispanic days before the conquest. And so here we can see like a much more realistic rendering of what the plaza would have looked like. And right here we can compare it, slide it back and forth to see modern day Mexico City and compare it. And I love the way you can see that some of the canals, like this one here, became a road in modern day Mexico City. Here's the big temple plaza. Here's the Mexican City Plaza. It shows you how that past really influences the present. And here's another example, a wider shot of the city. You've got a great view of all of those canals. Some of the temple centers down here, this was Lake, and we can see that in this part of the city, above that line, is separate from this part down here. This was established as city. Obviously, the buildings might be different, but it was established as city before the conquest, and then this would have come after the Spanish drained the lake. So we can see that there are a lot of influences on modern day Mexico from the pre-Hispanic times. These are some of my sources. Well, these are my sources. Thank you.